I've had a chance to play a good chunk of Paper Mario the Origami King at this point, and I gotta say, it's grown on me quite a bit from my initial impressions. Yet at the same time, I've also grown apathetic about playing any more of it. Right off the bat, I enjoyed the colorful world and the tone the game was going for. It was cheerful, yet mischievous, and though the pacing held back my enjoyment overall, I still knew I wanted to experience more of it. The early part of the game does a lot of the heavy lifting story-wise, with plot points that are delivered through text boxes that all proceed at one speed. It was a drag during the first hour especially, due to just how many text prompts there were, which really kept the pace of the game sedated. Things eventually improve, or at least they got to a point where I began not to notice the dialogue prompts individually. And that was because the slower pace is permeated more than just the speed of text boxes. Many elements of the game are all working together to keep the pace artificially slow. From Mario's run speed to the superfluous battle animations and more, work is being done to deliberately keep the tempo of the game at a stroll instead of a sprint. In total, it makes for a game that's a bit slower than I'd personally like, but I do recognize that it likely plays a key part into one of my favorite aspects of the game. After Breath of the Wild and later Mario Odyssey introduced the idea of an overabundance of micropuzzles in a larger overworld, Paper Mario implements the same concept in the form of hidden toads. These guys are everywhere in the world, and each one requires a small amount of observational skills and problem solving in order to collect them. I'm guessing that if progression took place at a faster clip, then it likely wouldn't have allowed for the time required for observation to be most effective. Toads are concealed all over the world, but one of the most interesting and enjoyable ones to collect was the one at the top of the flagpole. What initially looks like nothing more than a golf flagpole garners a second look due to just how tall it is. After noticing that, the next step was to notice that the ground was uneven, and to use my hammer on it. As a reward, I was treated to a classic Super Mario Bros. Moment, where jumping to the flagpole gave me a great rush of nostalgia. It was a multi-staged puzzle that led to a fun reveal at the end and a smile on my face. If you were paying close attention, you may have noticed something else though. This flash of fan service held a secondary purpose. It was a deliberate distraction so that you wouldn't notice that the flag itself was patterned like a toad, and it was still connected to the flagpole once all was said and done. Only after jumping for the blocks a second time and hitting the flag itself with my hammer did I release that hidden toad. This was an iterative puzzle that followed a clear logic and played with players' expectations directly. There were multiple things that required that I pay attention, and then I had to put it all together to collect all the toads. The more hidden toads I discovered, however, the more the cracks in the game design began to show. Finding toads serves little to no gameplay purpose, as they only provide a few coins as a reward. It's more of a scavenger hunt. Next, you begin to notice that most of the toads' hiding places get repeated, and the way they're discovered is very frequently the same. Rather than being the multi-staged puzzles like the one I mentioned earlier, they're more frequently just laying about in the overworld, waiting to be collected once you spot them. And the root of all of that is down to the fact that Mario is extremely limited in the ways that he's able to interact with the world. In this case, he almost exclusively has to use his hammer. This simplicity removes a lot of the puzzle solving out of many instances. See a tree with a unique leaf? Use the hammer, collect a toad. See something odd in a wall? Use the hammer, collect a toad. Suspicious of anything? All you have to do is use your hammer to check. There are the rare occasions where Mario has to pull a toad out of a difficult situation, but that is done with a single button press after the prompt comes up. It doesn't do a lot to mix up the gameplay. The other way that Mario interacts with the world is through his confetti celebration. After defeating any enemy, or just hammering away at enough random objects, confetti will fall for Mario to suck up. Collect enough of it, and you can repair locations in the world that have been ripped and torn apart. In theory, this has some great potential. The combination of resource management and progression gating that this allows for is fantastic, yet it never quite reaches the heights that it should. And that comes back to just how basic of an implementation they went for. Managing the confetti resource is a complete non-issue because of how abundant it is everywhere in the world. So much so that it felt like I would have to deliberately try to run out if I wanted to see the bottom of the bag. The other downside is that repair patches are used primarily as a sort of collectible, rather than any sort of progression, with very few exceptions. Every region in the game keeps a list of how many holes you've patched, and the only reward you'll see for filling them in are coins. It doesn't require a keen eye or any sort of skill to fill them in, so it just becomes an exercise of converting one plentiful resource into a different, overly abundant resource. And speaking of coins, I'm at the point in the game where I have so many, and nothing to spend them on, it feels like collecting them is pointless. Coins are scattered across the world to collect. Coins are rewards for filling in holes. Coins are given as bonuses for completing battles with different conditions being met. They're everywhere, and with so many thousand already collected, seeing a handful on the ground just feels excessive and not worth the time necessary to pick them up. Battles in this game may look at first glance similar to previous Paper Mario battles, in that they look like they're turn-based RPG battles. I think that's an incorrect way to look at them though. Every battle is better to be considered a puzzle, as every encounter has an intended solution, and if you're able to find it, it's possible to defeat all the enemies without taking any damage. Before selecting your initial attack, you first need to slide and rotate the arena to line up enemies in formations that allow for combination attacks. It's the type of puzzle that I haven't seen before and takes a bit of consideration to excel at. It's not possible to just jam on buttons and come to the correct solution. The controls in these sections are a bit funky though, and a bit hard to showcase in a video. At its core, they're best summed up as inconsistent. Sometimes pushing up moves the circle clockwise. Sometimes pushing up moves it counterclockwise. Same goes for selecting the different rings to interact with. Even after a dozen hours with the game, I still found myself making movement mistakes, and that really detracts from these sections as a whole. In the end though, I eventually realized that solving the puzzles correctly actually had very little impact or reward. Sure, failing to find the correct solution meant that enemies would be left alive and that they'd attack me. But at least in the first several worlds, they do so little damage that this literally didn't matter. Health was never an issue. The only other thing that's missed out on by not completing the battles flawlessly is the bonus that's given out at the end of the battle. What exactly is the bonus? More coins. Stop me if you've heard this before, but the fact that battles only exist as a vehicle to reward coins make them begin to feel pointless too. They only serve to slow down an already slow game. I found myself actively avoiding enemies because gaining coins wasn't necessary. I found that I never went out of my way to fill my confetti bag because I always had enough whenever I needed it. When I did get into battles, I eventually started deliberately not completing puzzles in an attempt to get through them faster and make the combat at least a little bit more compelling. Not only that, I have an abundance of healing items in my inventory now too, because I refused to use them in an effort to make battles more of a challenge. Yet I still managed to collect enough health otherwise that I never actually died. If all of this sounds like I'm hating on the game, I don't mean to. There were some aspects that I enjoyed a ton, like just how funny the game can be, not to mention how punny the game is too. I mean, a fast travel system for a paper-themed game that's literally called fax travel is brilliant. I enjoyed it well enough to stick with it for more than 10 hours, and that's a lot more than I do for a ton of games. It just shocked me at how much of the game I was actively avoiding in order to enjoy my time with it more. It's a game that has some really great ideas, fantastic art direction and music, that's unfortunately just weighed down by a lack of meaningful mechanics. Outside of the critical path, nothing is required or even incentivized particularly well, which for me just leads to apathy. I could play more, that'd be fine. Or I could just stop where I'm at and not feel like I'm missing anything significant. I guess what I'm trying to say is, my emotional investment here is paper thin. Sorry, that was terrible.